Okay, so, all right, let me start by introducing myself. So my name is Jen Kaifesh. I own Great Expectations College Prep. We're a college prep company that works with families on the entire process. So starting in high school, trying to figure out coursework, what you can do to differentiate yourself, understanding the application process, and of course, eventually the actual application process and doing essays and coming up with college lists, all of that sort of stuff. So what I would like to do today is this is going to be kind of a cursory overview of everything that's involved in the process, so you know what to be thinking. I know we have people as young as 8th grade, some seniors, so we're going to try to give as much information that's kind of broad as we possibly can, but we'll also try to do some things that are going to be some grade specific. So hello everybody, we got some newcomers here. So, okay, and if everybody wants to just make sure they're on mute, there's just a little rustling here and there, that'd be great. Okay, so first of all, I'm gonna actually share my screen and kind of break this down for a second. So this is, let's see. All right, can you guys all see this now? Everybody see the graph? Excellent, okay. Okay, so this is just something to be aware of, and we're going to talk about each of these sections as we go through. So the standardized test score thing is obviously shifting a little bit, but based on your grade, I didn't want to take it out or make it too big, so we'll talk about how that's different by grade. But these are the components of an application that admissions officers are considering. So the reality is your high school academics at this point are the most important thing, which we'll spend some time chatting about rigor, course selection, how much it needs to factor into what you're interested in, things like that, and how it compares to your classmates. The other aspect with standardized test scores, this is a big variable right now because you may have heard some schools are test optional, some are test blind. We'll talk about the difference there, but a lot of other schools are trying to go back to requiring them as soon as they possibly can once COVID allows. Now, extracurricular activities, which is spelled wrong, I see, so I'll fix that. Extracurricular activities is the big question mark. This is something that, depending on your interests, they can be almost ways of exploring your career path on your own. It can be volunteer work, it can be sports, it can be music, it can be a lot of things. So that's another big one we'll talk more about. Essays and letters of recommendation, this is what humanizes your application. This is the sort of thing where killer essays and letters aren't necessarily going to make up for bad scores or bad grades, of course, but this is what gets you in. I always say that your test scores and your grades are what get you looked at. It's your activities and essays and letters and things like that that will get you an acceptance at your dream schools. And miscellaneous will also break down kind of the other factors that can play a role in admissions, but it's a smaller piece of the pie, literally and figuratively here, where you can kind of look at it and say, if it helps you, great, but don't stress about some of these factors. So let's start by talking about basically high school academics. What matters here? So another thing to keep in mind when I'm talking, I will always be trying to address to be competitive at the most competitive schools, right? So I want this to be, you're never going to come back and go, well, you told me I didn't need to do this. So we're going to focus on that, but I'll tell you when it's less important if you're applying to less competitive schools, or state schools and private schools, small and big, there's some differences. But overall, these are the three factors when it comes to academics that colleges care about. When they're looking at your grades, they're looking at your transcript. Let's just break these down. So course rigor is the most obvious one that you can understand what it is. This is how many APs, how many honors, how many advanced classes, right? When are you challenging yourself? If you can take regular biology or AP biology, which are you choosing, right? This, although it ties back to the GPA and the grades you get. So the biggest question, and talked about this, is that if you are debating, let's just go with AP biology compared to regular biology. The normal question is always, is it better to get an A in a regular class or B in an honors or an AP class? And what I've always said is what all the colleges will always say is an A in an AP class, right? It depends. Like no college wants the B or the C or the anything lower, but at the same time, they don't want the kid who's going to take the easy classes. So the challenge is picking what your strengths are. You don't need to take AP and honors everything, right? Depending on where you're strong, what you're interested in, the more you can challenge yourself, the more impressed colleges will be because you are less of a liability. If you think of it from their perspective, this is something where they are very, they're trying to make sure you're not going to drop out, right? So if you've only taken regular high school classes through all of high school, they don't know how you fare in college level classes. If you're taking APs, that's a college level class. That's what an AP advanced placement course is. So if you've taken several of those and done well, they're not going to have to worry about you as much. So it makes their life easier. They're more confident that you're going to do well, but then they look at the grades. Now, the reality is if you're not looking at the top schools in the country, like top 10, maybe even top 20, if you're looking below that, almost every college would prefer to see course rigor than perfect straight A's. They would rather see a B in an AP class, right? They want to know that you're challenging yourself, and it shows them you care, you're excited, you're interested, right? So if you always take the easy way out, that tells them something about you. So you want to be thinking of it from their perspective of how does this, how does this help? So from class rank, this is really about comparing yourself to your classmates. I think there's two different ways to do this. There's literal class rank, right? Which is I'm 5th out of 127 kids, right? Or whatever it is. A lot of high schools don't do that anymore, or at least they don't publish it for you. There are plenty of people who are going to say, or plenty of schools, high schools that will say, we don't rank, we don't want to put that pressure on our kids, but when they apply to college, the colleges are going to see the average GPAs for everything. So when you have something like that broken down, you still are being ranked against your classmates, if that makes any sense. Now, when class rank is also taken into consideration, most schools are weighting your GPA based on how many APs. So a standard scale, not everyone uses this, but an AP usually is like a 5.0 if the rest of the classes are on a 4.0. So the more APs you have, the higher the GPA. So there's the statistical, like how high is your GPA? There's also the factor of like, are you challenging yourself in a way compared to everyone else? So if you're at a high school that no one takes more than 2 APs in a given year, and you're taking 3, you're the most competitive applicant coming out of your class. If it's very common for people to take 4 or 5 and you're taking 2 or 3, you're less competitive, right? So a lot of it, just think of class rank as how do you fare compared to other people on that. So now, so I see the chat about the top 10, top 20 schools and below that for AP courses was the question. So what I was trying to say is that if you're looking at top 10 or 20 schools, they want the A in the AP class. If you're below the top 20, which again are incredible schools, and most of them, everybody would be very, very lucky to go to and attend, those schools are going to prefer to see a B in an AP than an A in a regular. My point was that if you're applying to the top 20, they want to see the A in the AP. They expect both. They expect rigor and people who excel in that rigor. Does that make sense? Any other questions about that while we're on that topic? Okay. Okay, so then moving on, why taking APs? We talked a little bit about the fact that APs in general are showing that you can, do well in a higher level course, you're ready for college. The other options are that you can earn college credit, right? So if you test well, so if you take AP biology, an A in the class, great. B in the class, fine. But if you take the AP exam, which is at the end of the year, we've got some feedback there. So if you take that AP exam at the end of the year, that is your chance to basically, if you get a 5, it's out of 5 score, or a score of 5. Do I have that? No, I don't. I thought I had a breakdown of the scores. 5 is like getting an A. A 5 is like getting an A in a college class. You learn, 90% of the material. A 4 is like a B, which is really great still in a college level class. 3 is considered passing. So if you're taking AP classes and you score a 1 or 2 on the AP exam, colleges will not be impressed with that, even if you got an A in the class. In that case, we would probably leave that score off. It is optional to send to colleges, but they do know that if you've taken an AP class, you've probably taken the AP exam, and if you choose not to send the score, it probably didn't go super well. So don't discount the importance of the exam. If you can get a 4 or 5, you get credit at almost every college in the country. There are some exceptions that won't let you place up, like if you're pre-med and you got it at a 5 in AP bio, some colleges won't apply that credit to Bio 101. They still want you to take the intro class to make sure you're on track for everything else. But a lot of schools will let you take the credit and go, great, you don't have to take another science requirement. What this means, if you have college credit, you can apply this a lot of different ways. You can graduate early, right? You can just be done in 3.5 years or 3 years, depending on how many scores. So from a financial standpoint, You can make college a lot less expensive if you take APs and do well on the AP exams. You can take a lighter course load, right? You could, if you test out of several classes, maybe freshman year while you're acclimating and doing all those early, pre-med classes that are really challenging, take 3 classes instead of 4 or 5 each semester. You can use it that way. You can also just fill it with fun classes. So this is the other reality, depending on, financially, if you're in a position to stay in college for 4 years to just explore things, having a lot of AP exam scores that are great, you can sit there and then go take a philosophy class and take, a screenwriting class, take whatever you want to take. So that's just something to consider with APs, beyond just impressing colleges and proving things. Now, AP participation. This is the other thing to keep in mind. So these are the only stats. They don't have anything from 2018 released yet, but I guarantee you the number's going up every year. So you can see that it almost doubled in 10 years, the number of students in the US that are taking APs. So what used to be very rare and only the top students were doing, now it's becoming more common for not average students, but above average students to take an AP here or there. So as soon as that becomes the norm, the opportunity to differentiate yourself by doing this gets tougher, right? So that's just something I think when you're thinking of APs, recognize that it's tough to not take APs and apply to any really competitive colleges. And again, the definition of competitive really depends on everything. There's a lot of factors, which we'll come back to. But so, all right, the number of AP courses and how that's changed during this time frame. Here are the AP courses. But the answer to your question, compared to 2007, it's the exact same number of APs. So this is something where it's not that more kids are taking APs because there's more offered. There are some high schools that didn't offer as many in the past, but back in 2000, this was still the same list for AP courses, just not maybe some colleges didn't offer it, but there are some that are standard. So keep in mind when you're looking at the number of students taking APs, the ones that are more uncommon are, for instance, looking at this list I've got in here, like AP Studio Art 3D Design or AP Music Theory. Those are things that no one's ever really taking if they haven't taken AP English, right, or AP History. These are kind of the supplements and the electives that people might take. But there's a lot of options here. So you don't have to just take the very basic ones, and you don't have to take AP Math if you're not good at AP Math, right? You've got AP Calculus, you've got AP Stats, but you can say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus more on the arts or the histories or the economics, psychology, right? There's a lot of options. So be aware that it is just more common at this point. These are all courses that have been around for a long time, but more high schools are offering more. And here's the other downside, depending on your high school, I guess, or upside, depending on your high school. If you have a high school that offers every single one of these APs, which is rare, but there's some big public schools in particular will have these. If they offer all of them, it can be held against you if you don't take one that's in your field of interest. So if you say to a college, I want to be a psychology major, and your high school offered AP psychology and you did not take it, it's a ding on your transcript, right? Because it shows that you weren't that serious about it. However, if you're at a high school that offers very few AP courses, you're always compared within the context of your high school of what's available. So if you don't take AP psychology because it wasn't offered, it's not held against you. What's even better is that if you were proactive then and went and found an online AP psychology course, or your local university or college offers it, go take Psychology 101 at the local university over the summer. Now you've shown you're that much more proactive and are taking initiative. All right. So this is just something with APs. If it's not an official AP class through your high school, you can find other ways to take these courses and kind of advance yourself. And we'll get back to your question on the majors and the liberal arts colleges. It's a good question, but it does depend on the school and your intended area of interest. But one thing just to keep in mind is are you declaring an intended major? You're declaring an intended major. You're not actually declaring a major. Usually the way it's phrased on applications is what is your intended area of academic interest, or your primary area of academic interest. So it's not necessarily that I'm going in pre-med, but some schools do actually hold you to what you put on the application. Undeclared and undecided are an option, and we'll come back to that when we talk about a little bit more and when that might be good, but when it's also bad. Okay, standardized testing. So the one thing you can take out of this pie, which I did not take out before I did this, is the SAT subject tests. So these were basically miniature final exams that the College Board offered that just got cut. They're offering the last ones in May, and they'll never be offered again. They've been canceled. So this is something, the subject test used to be a great way. Let's just say you took an AP science and did okay in the class, but not great, but you really knew the material, and maybe you had a really tough teacher, and maybe you ended up having some illness the day of the AP exam. If you can take the subject test, it was giving you a chance to like go, but no, look, I know it on a nationally standardized exam of what I should know from biology. You can prove you know it. Now that these tests don't exist anymore, the AP exams carry more weight. So this is how colleges compare apples to oranges. And we'll talk a ton about the changes in a second of what's going on with test blind, test optional in the world right now. But AP exams, nothing's affecting that right now. AP exams are still a way. If you get an A in a class and a kid from another high school gets an A in the class, who's better? We don't know. Do they know the same material? They're going to look at the AP exam scores to be like, who actually mastered the material? So just know that the APs of all things still matter. And when you can do well, you need to do very well. If you're not taking APs and you're not going to have the scores, that's fine. There are plenty of colleges that are great. You don't. So a question is, do you have to take the AP exam? It depends on your high school, to be honest. Some high schools actually make you sign a contract if you register for an AP class, basically saying, we're putting all this effort in, you have to make us look good by taking the test and doing well, right? That doesn't always happen, but that is very common. Again, if you do not take the AP exam, the reality is colleges are gonna not know that you didn't take it. They're just gonna know you didn't submit a score, which I would always say, if you even have a chance of doing well and getting that 3, which is the one that will give you credit. And again, some colleges will accept as credit, but it's at least a passing score. If you can finagle a 3 out of it, you want to send it to most colleges. If you don't take it, you'll never know if you could have gotten a 3, because you can get the 3 and not send it, right? Or if you take it, hope for a 3 and get a 2, we just don't send the score. So I would always say, take the AP exam whenever it's offered and just do your best to get that 3 or higher. And again, if you don't, it's not necessarily held against you. It's just now you're lacking a potential plus in the positive column, right? You could have sent them something great that would have helped them balance it. Now, one of the things to keep in mind for those of you with older students compared to younger students, if you have your juniors and seniors, well, seniors, I guess, are kind of past this, but if you have juniors in particular, this is going to be another test optional year with their senior year for almost every school. And then there are some schools, primarily California state schools right now, are leading the way and being test blind. The difference is test blind means they will not consider your scores no matter what. You cannot even add them to your application. They are irrelevant. So if you got a perfect 1600 and tried to submit to a school that was test blind, they wouldn't even look at it. So it doesn't help you, it doesn't hurt you, it just is non-existent. Test optional means that it's up to you whether you want to send the scores. And the reason so many schools right now are optional is that not everyone can take it, not everyone can test. So for instance, right now, I'm not sure how it's been where you guys are, but we're in Los Angeles. Test sites have been shut down for the last year. However, for clients who are willing to drive 45 minutes to go to Orange County, or drive to Vegas or something like that, the tests have all been happening for the past year. Nothing's been canceled. So colleges are going test optional in order to give kind of, make that a little bit more fair, so it's not being held against someone. If you can test well, again, you want to use this to your advantage. If you're a great student and a horrible tester, you may not want to test. It may not benefit you. But if you're younger than this, keep in mind that a lot of colleges are chomping at the bit to go back to requiring test scores, because this past year, I don't know how many articles you guys have read. It's probably terrifying if you read too many of them. But this last year was a bloodbath in admissions. But the number of applications was up so much because all the school went test optional. So if everyone's test optional, suddenly these kids have a decent GPA, not fabulous, but are terrible testers, who are like, I can apply to Harvard. I can apply to Stanford. So Harvard saw like a 55% increase in the number of applications they received, which just muddied the waters, right? So now you have admissions reps trying to differentiate between people. I was like, look, if you apply without test scores, it's not technically being held against you, but if you can apply with good test scores, it's going to help you. So just something to keep in mind, if you're even an average test taker, if you do any prep and you really make it a serious commitment, and you can get to where it's average or above average for your schools of choice, testing will benefit you. All right. Any questions on SAT, ACT right now with test optional? Feel free to speak up if so, or type it if you prefer. Either way works. All good? Okay.
Are you gonna talk about the value of an SAT versus ACT?
I was going to talk about the difference between them, so that's perfect. So yes, okay. We'll talk about the value and also the differences between the actual tests. So here's the main thing. The value is exactly the same. There are no universities in the US that value one over the other. That shifted about 7-8 years ago. It used to be very regional. So before the internet became a really big thing, it was like, when I took it, it was like, if you grew up in this part of the country, you took the SAT. If you grew up here, you probably took the ACT. Now, ACT is actually the most common test by a decent amount. It's an easier test to prepare for, and we'll talk about why in a second. So it depends on, you know, what skills you have. For some kids, SAT plays to their strengths, ACT preps, you know, plays to others, but it depends. So here are the big differences between them. ACT is testing what is the right answer. SAT is testing what is the best answer. SAT gives you more time per question. ACT is much more of a time crunch. You have more questions for fewer minutes, right? So what that means is that if you are somebody who's pretty straightforward, you're confident in your like general test taking abilities, and you can move at a pretty good clip and leave questions alone if you don't understand it, and it won't mess with your psyche, ACT is generally a better test. Because again, if you review certain grammar rules or certain math concepts, you're going to get those questions right. It's a straightforward question, basically going, do you know this, right? The reading comprehension on each test, I think, is the easiest way to break down the difference between the two. So think about, let's say on the SAT or the ACT, a question may be something like, where did red squirrels make their homes in the winter? Line 27 will say, red squirrels lived in the treetops in the wintertime. You go to your answer choices, treetops is an answer. It's that straightforward, but it moves 50% faster. So ACT is almost testing your ability to kind of speed read, skim, which the reality is colleges know is a valuable skill, because when you get to college, you're gonna have 400 pages of reading in a class a week. That's gonna be super overwhelming. You need to learn how to kind of get a general sense of things and move on. So that's the way ACT kind of plays their reading, is it's straightforward, but it's fast. SAT is more likely to ask questions like, you know, the main character, like in a such and such scenario, is more likely to do which of the following. It's like a hypothetical question of how well do you understand the character's motives, right? So it's a deeper, more, if you're a good AP English sort of kid, SAT reading can work just fine. But for a lot of other students, the reason they give you 50% more time on those questions is the test is like, knock your socks off, good luck, right? Like it's still gonna be a tricky question even if we give you more time. So SAT definitely plays a little bit more, I think, to people who are good at problem solving and a little bit trickier, if that makes any sense. The other thing to keep in mind, if you're eligible for accommodations, so if you have an IEP or 504, like anything that's, you know, you get extended time, you get extra breaks on your tests at school, any diagnoses for ADHD, dyslexia, things like that. SAT is much easier to get approved for because it's not a timing-based test. So again, they're like, sure, we'll give you more time. That's fine. Like, take as much time as you want. They're going to give you extended time as long as you have like doctor's notes and, you know, medical records backing up the diagnosis. ACT, look, a lot of students still get approved. So it's not that you can't get approved, but they're a little tougher about it because they know they're a timing-based test. So giving kids 50% more time on the ACT makes it way easier. So they're very hesitant and careful about who they give the extended time to. So generally your high school needs to start getting involved in sending a letter in, you know, having a teacher talk about how the student's incapable of finishing an exam in the regular amount of time or can't focus beyond X number of minutes, whatever it is. So just know that if you need any sort of accommodations, my recommendation is always to apply to both and try to get approved at both to see like ahead of time before you need to really test, because that may change which test you're going to take. Now, the question is it expected or preferred to take one or the other? And same questions if you should take both or if one is sufficient. One is 100% sufficient. There is no need to take both. In fact, I would really discourage anybody from doing that. They're very different tests. So if you try prepping for one or taking one and taking another, your pacing, the strategies, everything are very different. So if you're going back and forth between them, it's not great. Again, it's not expected or preferred to take one or the other. It's exactly the same. Every college will take either one equally. I know everyone always thinks that it makes sense that one would be more preferred than the other. It's just not. Almost all my kids because even the way I'm speaking, I know it sounds like SAT is a harder test, which you would think colleges would value more. But I'll tell you, my students who've gone to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, almost all of them took ACT. So it's not going to hold anybody back. It's picking the one that plays to your strengths better. And the one thing I will say is if you're waiting, especially for accommodations, if you're waiting to see about accommodations, the reality is that accommodations, if you can get them, like I said, for ACT, go for it. SAT might help, it might not, but it is something to keep in mind. If you are looking at, trying to think of an example. Basically, if you're waiting on something to decide which test to pursue, always start with ACT, because it's so straightforward that if you're reviewing grammar, math, etc., you're literally just relearning concepts that you need to know that will be tested on SAT. But the strategies for SAT will mess you up royally on the ACT. So you never want to go from SAT to ACT. If anything, it's ACT. And then if you have to make the switch, you move to SAT. So question is, merit scholarships are based on results from both. Correct. There's one kind of exception, but even it shouldn't be starting this year. So national merit. When you hear about national merit stuff, got this. So talk about the PSAT and national merit scholarships. The reality is that the national merit scholarship, as of last year, was supposed to include ACT scores. So you could submit ACT scores to be considered, but COVID messed all of that up. So it went out the window. They decided not to do it. They even canceled half the PSATs in the fall, depending on what location you were in. Some people took PSAT this spring. It's a whole thing. So in theory, the national merit scholarships are only PSAT, but again, they're saying this year ACT will be eligible as well. This is going to be the first year that's ever happened. So you want to keep an eye on it, to be honest, because they haven't announced anything new other than an update saying that's the new plan. They're going to go back to letting both tests be eligible. The way national merit scholarships work is that if you are we'll talk about PSAT since that's the way it's always worked, is that you need to be basically in the top 3% of testers to get any kind of recognition. So I always say if you're testing below the top, whatever the top 10%, the 90th percentile is, you can kind of look online to see what those scores are. If you're below that, I honestly wouldn't stress about taking the PSAT or the PACT, whatever it ends up being for this test, because the amount of improvement you would need, where if you got a perfect score on your PSAT as a junior, you'd be eligible for the national merit scholarships, right? You'll probably get some recognition. It looks great on college applications, but you can't actually send the score to any colleges. It's only good for this sort of thing. You'd have to go take the real SAT or ACT anyways. So the reason I think it's important to understand this is that if ACT is if ACT is this test that's for you, that plays to your strengths, you might, again, depending on what happens with the ACT being, helping you be eligible for the national merit scholarships, you might be set. But let's just say things get screwed up again this year with COVID. They're only looking at PSAT scores. It's up to you how much you want that scholarship and how realistic it is you'll be in the top 3%. So what generally happens in the top 3% is you have to be in the top 1% to really be eligible for money. Top 3%, that's when you hear about like semifinalists and things like that. National merit finalists get you to maybe getting money. That's like top 2%, and then the top 1% really get the money. But it is based on state. So the average score for each state is different. So when you look at what it is requiring, to be top 1%, top 3% last year, it's different between California and Texas and Montana and New York. Everyone's different. So you can kind of get a sense of that. But PSAT, if you can be in the top 3%, absolutely worth taking. It's great. And again, a lot of colleges just love being able to say how many national merit finalists they accepted. And it's a feather in their cap. So if you can put that on your application, they love it. I'll be honest, the money that comes from the PSAT score, unless you're the top people, it's negligible compared to the money that an individual college might give you for good SAT or ACT scores. So recognize that the PSAT scores definitely can matter and they can help you, but they don't carry that much weight. One other thing that's worth pointing out, by the way, if you're younger than a junior, let's just say you're a sophomore, you're in 10th grade, your school allows you to take the PSAT to kind of try it out, and you get a perfect score. You are not eligible for anything. So you have to be a junior to be eligible for any of these scholarships. It's a junior year thing. So when you take it in 10th grade, it's really just practice, or 9th grade. Some schools even let 9th graders take it. So again, you wouldn't put it on your applications. No one's ever going to know, and you're not eligible for anything. It's just more you going, cool, I'm good at this. And now you know which test maybe to move forward with, or how close you are. but do recognize that there is the PSAT for 11th graders is a slightly different test than the one for 9th and 10th graders. Those are easier tests. They're built to your grade level. So this is also something to keep in mind. The SAT and ACT go mathematically through Algebra 2. All right. So when you take the PSAT on any of the earlier years, the math will be a little bit easier because they're expecting you to be younger. If you are done with Algebra 2 as a sophomore, in reality, you could start prepping and taking the SAT or ACT as early as the summer after sophomore year. I have kids who are done with testing going into junior year because they were strong at math, strong at grammar. They're not learning anything new in high school. So great. If a kid is either not in Algebra 2 as a sophomore, if you're taking a junior year, great. You might want to start prep halfway through junior year because you want some of that Algebra 2 base, but there aren't that many questions on Algebra 2. So you want to get under as much under your belt as you can. But what I always say is you want to be done testing SAT or ACT really definitely by the end of junior year. Because if you're trying to build a college list without having a clue what your scores are, it's challenging. And I have students all the time who are like, I'm pretty sure I can break 1400 on the SAT. And they end up with a 1230 and all of our schools are wrong, right? So you want to know what your test scores are going in, to know how competitive you are at certain places. In an ideal world, if you can be done testing, I would say by halfway through junior year, like test in the fall, that's great. That's going to make life really easy for you. Second semester junior year, now you can focus on any APs you're taking, finals, right? All of the stuff that junior year is so important about, and you can rest and relax and, visit colleges, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. Anyways, and now other things, I think we talked about kind of, the test optional, test blind, but do you guys have any questions about standardized testing, ACT, SAT, anything? Good. Okay. Okay, let's move on. So just to give you a sense of scores, because a lot of people are more familiar with SAT, I just want you guys to kind of see what these scores mean. So when you hear people talking about them, you understand what's going on. For the SAT, okay, one other thing we didn't talk about, ACT has a much greater curve. So the way this works, SAT, if you get a certain number of questions right, this is your score, right? You're gonna get this. ACT is based on how everyone else did in the country that day. So the national average is out of 36, national average has to stay at 21. So if everyone does fabulously that day, your grade may be a little low because they had to shift the scores down in order to accommodate where if the average was a 23, national average has to be a 21, people get bumped down, but it works the other way too. So if a test was abnormally hard, it can really benefit you. And I have students, I tell everyone take it at least twice because the curve alone, even if you get nothing, you learn nothing new. You have the exact same information going into the second test date, especially with ACT. All it takes is a better curve. And I mean, it can be several points. It can be a big difference. So ACT, the curve is more significant, but this is why you always take it at least twice. 3 times is kind of the max for either test for what it's worth. You're probably not going to improve after the 3rd time. Sometimes this first time is really more getting jitters out. Second is, I think I got it, but maybe one section was a little lower than you wanted. And then, 3rd is kind of recapping it. Now, one thing to talk about is the idea of super scoring. So this is something you may have heard about. Most colleges at this point are doing it. It means, let's say you take SAT in March and in May. And in March, you nail math, but you miss bubble on verbal and your verbal score was terrible. In May, it's the opposite. You did fabulously on verbal, but you fell asleep halfway through math and your math score is terrible. You can take your math from March and your verbal from May and create a better composite score. All right, that is a very common thing. It used to be somewhat rare, but colleges, being the eternal marketers of themselves that they are, realize that they can say they have a higher test score average if they do that. So most colleges, when you see their averages, they usually are super scored. So it can be over multiple sittings. ACT is a little unique on this one because ACT, the way they operate with super scoring, let's just say you take it, we'll do the same thing. You take it twice. On the first day, there's 4 sections. There's English, there's math, there's reading, and then ACT has science. That's the thing they have different. The science section does not test your science knowledge. It's your ability to read graphs and charts. All right, so just keep that in mind. It's not going to be something that if you say I'm bad at science, it doesn't matter. It's about looking at a graph saying which bird flew faster. But let's say on one test date, you got 2 perfect 36s on 2 sections and then bomb the other 2. Next time, 2 36s, 2 26s in reverse, right? And by the way, 26 is not bombing. But just to make my math easy, if you're trying to do that, your composite for each day would be a 31, right? You would be averaging your 26s and 36s. So you would have a good composite, but if you super scored, you would have a 36, right? With averaging those. The way ACT does it on applications at this point is you're allowed to put your highest English, what test date, highest math, what test date, highest reading, highest science. And so you could put all your 36s, but it asks for what's your highest composite, what test date, which means you would have to put that 31 as your composite. But don't stress about that. Don't let that influence you, because the reality is ACT is absolutely, or any college is absolutely super scoring because it benefits them. So if they're letting you list your highest in each section, even though the composite may be from a single test date, they care about your section scores. Okay. Okay. So again, this is just something to know your scores. Again, some basic breakdowns between SAT and ACT. But figuring out which test is right for you is a very important aspect. Taking practice tests is one thing. So comparing scores, we offer proctored exams every weekend. The thing is, we always say you don't want to just compare your scores going, I did slightly better looking at this chart on my SAT or my ACT. When you have that kind of difference, it could be that the ACT you could improve much faster on, right? And that it was just a pacing issue, or that you didn't understand how the science section worked, but 5 minutes of prep, you understand it, that score could skyrocket. So make sure you're not just comparing scores when you move forward. It's really about what's going to be a better fit for you. And whether it's us or anyone else, what we have something called a test prep diagnostic, which is you take a proctored exam, 2 hours of review to go over every question, why you're missing what you're missing. So we know, is it that you've never learned this? Is it that you forgot it? Is it that, maybe your geometry teacher skipped this whole unit, or you just weren't that great at geometry? Those things all affect which test may be better, what plays to your strengths or weaknesses. For instance, there's more geometry on ACT than there is SAT, but SAT is a lot of word problems and real world situations. So learning, again, what's going to strengthen you. Okay, question about, can you also super score for the optional essay score? This is a great point, which I forgot to mention. So thank you for bringing up the essay. First of all, ACT still technically has an essay. I don't know how much longer that's going to be because the SAT just got rid of the essay. So they've canceled. There is no essay attached to the SAT anymore. So you can't even take an essay section on the SAT after this spring. So it's gone. Colleges are never going to require it, which in my mind means that you're going to be probably seeing the ACT essay go away very soon. The super scoring for the optional essay, in theory, yes. Because if you took one test date where you wrote the essay, you did great. Maybe the second time you take it, you did not take it with a writing score. You could take the one with the good writing score. If you took it twice and bombed it, you would just put the best one. Same exact thing. But keep in mind, the essay score on ACT does not factor into the composite score. So when you hear people talk about, I got a 31 on the ACT, the essay is not even a part of that. When the colleges get their score report, they see the 4 sections. They see English, math, reading, science. They see your composite score. And then a little score tacked on in the corner is your essay score. All right. And that's just basically your ability to show, can you write under pressure? One reason, if you do take this, if you're older and the ACT essay is still around, because I think for you youngins out there right now, it's probably going to be gone by the time you test. If you are testing and the essay is, available, some colleges who will accept it and look at it, use it as a basis to compare your college essays, which makes perfect sense because there's no control factor with your college essay. You could have hired a professional writer to write your essay. There's no way for them to confirm that or check that. But what is a reality is that if they can see on your ACT that you can't string a sentence together and your grammar's horrible, right? All these things, but you wrote this beautifully polished essay as your personal statement, it's a red flag to colleges. So just know that some kids, I've had students tell me they didn't really try on the ACT essay because they didn't think their colleges required that. I was like, great, now you have a horribly low standard, which means we can't write a very polished essay. So hopefully it goes away and it's out of, it's not a factor. But for the time being, if you're a good writer, take it. The other reality is during test optional time, no colleges accept or requiring the ACT in the first place right now. So they're definitely not requiring the essay. So if you take the ACT and you're a terrible writer, don't take it with the writing portion, right? Don't do the essay. If you're a great writer, go ahead and do it and you'll have additional positive information to share. Okay. Any other questions on that? Are we good on that? Okay, moving along. So just a timeline, we kind of talked about this with the SAT and ACT prep. Usually that summer before junior year, if you're done with Algebra 2 as a sophomore, is a great time to start. And then you can be testing in the fall. By the way, you're not going to do 4 sittings. The whole idea is there's kind of like, you'll do 2 or 3 months between tests generally, just where the tests are, how they're kind of, by the time you get your scores back, want to do a little prep and take it again. But sophomore year, again, there's some geniuses who do it, but it's not necessary. So don't feel like if you took Algebra 2 as a freshman and you really want to do it sophomore year, you're welcome to, but you would want to make sure your reading skills and everything else are up to par. Now, here's the thing about seniors taking it. The one thing to keep in mind is, yes, your reading skills might be better. You might have learned more math, but if you get too far past the material on the test, so let's say you are in advanced math and you wait to test, you're trying to remember formulas from math class freshman year, doesn't help you. So that's why I say as soon as you're done with Algebra 2, it's usually good to start prepping and testing while it's fresh. So you're not trying to remember. I had a student who took AP Calc BC as a junior, and we were trying to do this and she couldn't remember how to add fractions because she hadn't had to do it in so long. So just, keep that in mind when you're coming up with your game plan. Okay, oh, this is out of order. That explains. I was like, I knew this was somewhere. So this lovely thing with the AP scores, this is what we were talking about before, with what those scores mean for you. Just again, remember that the 1s and 2s are what you really want to avoid. 3s can be impressive for some schools, and some are pleased with it, some are not. 4s and 5s are great everywhere. No one, like Stanford's happy with 4s and 5s. So that was out of order. Okay, extracurricular activities. So this is something I think a lot of people, and especially a lot of students, get frustrated trying to understand what they're looking for, right? So there's a couple things. This is, again, like we talked about with your essays and your letters of rec, this is where you become more human. This is where they get to know what matters to you. How you spend your spare time, they're going to get a sense of what do you care about? Are you somebody that, if you could, would you spend every waking minute asleep or playing video games? Or are you somebody that wants to spend every waking minute volunteering or playing lacrosse or what? Like, where are your priorities? Now, the community impact, this is a broad category. And the reason they're going to have it as 50% is because it can be you being the star lacrosse player. That's totally fair. It can also be volunteer work. It could be making something better at your high school, right? I had a girl at a local public high school here who was very into the environment. She was trying to come up with something to do that would be impressive, not even impressive, that would make a difference, because she forgot to mention it to me as an accomplishment. And what she had done was she learned, this little cute, like little blonde girl who came up to me and started talking about waterless urinals and how good they were for the environment. She went to her high school and started talking about how this would be great because we were in California and there's droughts and this is really a waste of water. And the school was like, we don't have time for this. Like, this is not a priority for us. So she asked if she could run point. She had a binder like 3 inches thick of different urinal models, reached out to all these plumbers, got people who were willing to do stuff basically for free, but also raised money on the side through the PTA, built all this, got all the urinals replaced. And even though it's like what's beautiful about it is it's so random, right? It's such an obscure thing. It's a problem normal people wouldn't even acknowledge as a problem, that you don't have waterless urinals. And this was 10 years ago when this was not, common. But the fact that that girl got in everywhere she applied, because colleges looked at her and go, this is somebody who identifies problems, goes out of her way to solve them. And it wasn't even to her benefit. Like I said, it took her weeks when we were coming up with essay topics to go, oh, by the way, I did this thing. And it was like, she didn't do it for college stuff. She did it because she was bored and thought she could help. That's the community impact aspect. It doesn't have to be that big. It can be way bigger, right? But the kids that they love are the ones where there wasn't impact. You affected change in a way that other students didn't. So think of where there would be a gap or a hole in your high school or your community if you weren't there. What have you changed? What have you addressed? And by the way, not every kid is going to affect huge change. That's just not reasonable or realistic to expect. But it can be small things. So, banning plastic straws if we're going on the environmental stuff, looking for if there's, social justice aspects you want to fight for. It could be, you think that the local public elementary schools don't have enough STEM opportunities and want to encourage girls to pursue STEM. Go talk to the schools. How can we make, science and technology and all this stuff interesting to first graders, for, girls who've never been around it? You can find the things that matter to you. That's what colleges care about. So keep in mind everything that you're doing in high school. The idea is that you're showing them, here's what I'm going to do, tenfold when I get to your campus. So if what they see from your high school experience is that you studied a lot and stayed inside and didn't really engage in your community, they aren't going to look at you as somebody who's going to be a great member of their community, right? You don't get involved, you don't do stuff. But if you join yearbook or robotics or sporting events or the orchestra or whatever it is, it tells them you're going to get involved and invested in whatever matters to you. And it doesn't have to be 10 things, it can be one or two, right? And that's what they care about, is that if it matters to you, great. They want to see that you're out there trying to make a difference and get involved. Now, leadership and volunteer work, to kind of talk about the difference here. Leadership, yes, that could mean being captain of a sports team. It could mean being president of a club or the student government. It can be those things that people think of when they think of leadership. But even like that girl with the waterless urinals, she was a leader. She came up with an idea. She initiated. She was a self-starter. She got a couple other people involved. She was leading a team to replace all the urinals at her high school. That counts, right? It's not a position. She's not president of the urinal club. Like, it's something very obscure and vague. It's not a title. It's a role, right? It's what she did that made her a leader, not a position that she was like nominated for. So leadership comes in different forms. Volunteer work, the biggest thing I can say here is that it should be thematic. There should not be, I think where colleges get a little frustrated is when it's clear you're padding your resume, going, oh, I can get 4 hours of community service by going to the animal shelter, or I can do this, and you're like checking it off. I'm like, done, got it. This is something that they want to see, something that matters to you. And so I say, like, stop and think, especially if you're younger, you've got a lot of years. What matters to you? What is near and dear to your heart? Who do you want to help? Think of your family. Think of illnesses you've seen people struggle with. If you care about puppies in shelters, do you care about immigrants? Do you care about, BLM? Do you care? Like, pick a thing, pick a cause. And like, if you're interested in medicine, great, you can do medicine stuff, but it's also about, maybe you have someone in your family with MS and you want to do MS research, or you want to get involved in that. That ties everything together. So your volunteer work could be helping cute puppies. That's totally fine and that's great. But if it can connect to kind of your community impact, your areas of academic interest, it gets better. So same thing, if you're kind of a social justice, you're into politics or law, your volunteer work can easily connect to that. So come up with something that over the years you can develop and get more and more involved in a certain cause. That's going to help you stand out, because I think where people struggle is when they're doing a lot of different things. Put yourself in the admissions officer's shoes. If they're just seeing a list of random things you did for 4 hours one time, they have no idea who you are, right? It doesn't tell them anything about what drives you, what motivates you, anything like that. They don't get a sense of what role you play in their community. It's like, great, you had to do 50 hours or 20 hours of community service to graduate. You did 21, right? You did just enough. So be aware that they know also when there's minimums. And so if your school requires a ton, that's great. But it also means that if you just do the minimum, it's still, being compared to the kids who did twice as much as what was required, even if they're at a high school who required more or less than you. Now, one thing, so there's a question about part-time or summer jobs impacting admissions. So this is a great question. So, when we talk extracurriculars, again, this is everything you're doing. This could be, we'll talk about the jobs and, internships and things like that in a second. It could be taking a college class. It could be babysitting. It could be starting your own little job where you clean trash cans for your neighbors, right? It can be a lot of different things. Part-time and summer jobs are great. And I think people overlook the appeal to colleges. If you're in a position, whether you're affluent or not, you might be in a position where the student doesn't have to work to pay rent, in which case, great, that's a luxury. But it tells colleges a lot that if the kid doesn't have to work but chooses to, it tells them a lot about their upbringing, that not everything was handed to them. It tells them the kid has work ethic, that they didn't get fired from a job that wasn't with somebody they're related to, right? So pick jobs that show character and show work ethic and determination. Something fancy, like if you work at your aunt or uncle's law firm and answer phones and make $25 an hour, it's not that impressive, to be honest. Like, and it may have been super challenging, right? But the reality is what you're doing is like, okay, so somebody there, and even if you don't mention that, we can avoid it. By the way, one thing to keep in mind is working at a parent's company, they know where your parents work. It's listed on the application. So it doesn't mean don't do it, but it also means no one's going to be impressed that you got the gig if you work for mom or dad's company. It's just going to be great, better than doing nothing, but not as impressive as frankly working at McDonald's, right? We're bagging groceries, things that show a different level of work ethic and humility, where you're not above kind of manual labor, right? You're not above those jobs that, you know, your friends don't want. That's what they want to see, is the kids who are willing to do the work. So part-time or summer jobs, anything like that. But if you're interested in medical research and you can get a job, you know, at a hospital or work for a doctor, and it's like, you know, an internship, that's something, you know, that looks great. That's fine. What if it's like a real job at a parent's company? So I always use myself as a perfect example. I worked for my dad every summer. He was so much harder on me than anyone else. And it was one of those where I recognize that sometimes working at a parent's company can be really tough. That is fine. But again, I'm not saying don't do it, but recognize from a college's perspective, they have no way of knowing that. So it's harder to kind of, I think, articulate that on the page, where you can say what you did as the job, but also they recognize that if they called to like check on that and called the boss, they're calling the parent who of course is going to vouch for the kid. So there's just an extra level of almost accountability when it's something completely unrelated, but it's not a bad thing. I always learned more, probably my skin got thicker working for my dad than it could have in any other situation. That's great, right? Do that if you can or want to, but I would encourage maybe having something else as well in some scenario, so that colleges aren't going to be, you know, only looking at that thinking it could have been an easy job. Now, if there's ever tangible things where you can say, like, I had a kid who was in charge of sales stuff for a parent's company, and he actually could break down, like, brought in X amount of revenue or managed this type of thing. It was very specific. That's better, right? But again, you can BS things a little bit more easily when it's your parent's company. So just with a grain of salt, doesn't mean don't do it. It just means that, you know, colleges look at it differently, and it's a different skill set in reality than it would be to go scoop ice cream at Baskin Robbins, which seems like it's a lesser skill set, but from people's standpoint and your ability to work with people, that's something different. Any other questions about those things? We'll talk about notable accomplishments in a moment. Okay, so notable accomplishments. Okay, I already want to know these caramels and cookies. So for what it's worth, I was like, this is something, maybe I take it back, and as long as I get some, I'll say it's a great summer job. So notable accomplishments, I do think, you know, it's relative. So this could be entering a writing competition, right? And you enter a poetry contest, great. It could be, you know, being your class valedictorian. It could be being a state champ swimmer, right? Anything like that is great. And we'll talk about athletic recruitment in a little bit too, because that's, you know, kind of all this whole pie in different ways. So, but notice notable accomplishments. And again, for that girl, the waterless urinals thing was an accomplishment. So there's certain actions, and you'll realize this when you start hearing stories about kids who get in or reading articles. Some of the kids who get in that sound so impressive, it's because they found an activity or an accomplishment that knocked out every piece of this pie, right? It was one thing they did that showed leadership and helped the community, right? It was some amazing, you know, thing that they did that no one else has done. That sort of thing, obviously, is the best, but those are super rare and few and far between. Okay, so moving on from this, I want to show you what an actual application looks like. This is what the activities section of a college application looks like. This is the scary part. And I think if you recognize you have one line to describe the activity, it's 150 characters. So it's less than a tweet. You have on that front line, you can check the boxes for what grades you did it, 10, 11, 12, or 9, 10, 11, 12. PG, by the way, is the post-grad year is like a 13th grade East Coast boarding schools, so it's super obscure. If you have it, great, but most kids don't. Hours per week, weeks per year, when did you do it? Any positions held or honors won, or the name of your employer, and then that one line below it to describe the activity. So what happens, I think, with this is it's a reminder that sometimes you think you've done, again, if you did 4 hours, think about if you check one box 4 hours a week, 1 week a year, and, you know, cleaned out cages at the animal shelter. It looks like you didn't really care. You want something where you can check as many of the boxes as possible, or if you haven't been doing it extensively through high school, more hours per week, more weeks per year. It shows, you know, at least a commitment during junior year or senior year that you're really taking this seriously and investing a lot of time in it. And by the way, if you're younger, start tracking this stuff, because the number of seniors I see when they're filling this out, like, I have no idea how long I spent on that freshman year. It's like, think about the structure and start taking notes of how, how many hours, how many weeks. And sometimes you have to average things. I totally get that. But this is, get this down on paper somewhere. The description of the activity. This is the other thing to be aware of. The description should be about your role. All right. So it's not about, I had a girl recently who was in French club. And so she talked about French club, and I think she was president of French club. And the activity was basically, I am president of French club. We meet every Friday and like eat baguettes, right? Like, there was nothing really there. I had no idea what she actually did. We have no idea what the club actually does. And so far it sounds not that interesting or compelling. You could rewrite that. And I started talking to her and she's like, oh, well, we like coordinated French cooking lessons over Zoom, and we would have, mandatory then over dinner, we could only speak in French to each other. And we helped sponsor a French exchange student this coming year. And it was all these active things. So think of that line as a resume when you're going to have active verbs, right? So if you think of a resume, it's like led this, coordinated this, organized this, right? Founded this. You want those types of verbs for every activity. It's not that you're founding the varsity soccer team, but maybe what you're doing is like coordinating team get-togethers or additional practices, right? Or, managing some part of the schedule, or busing system. Anything you can show what you did, that's what colleges care about. They don't care what the club did. They care what your role was within it. So just think of that when you're in things. Okay, so good question here. So what counts as far as trying things out in clubs? For instance, if I participated in only a semester of solar club, is it still worth mentioning if I don't feel like I contributed much in that period of time? It's a great question. I think it depends what else you've got. So you have on the Common App, which is the main application for most schools in the US. There are some exceptions, obviously, but like 90 to 95% are on this application. You have 10 slots. So what I would tell you is if you have 11 activities, and Solar Club is the one that you feel like I showed up for a couple of meetings, I did a couple of things, but it wasn't that impressive, that's the one that gets left off. If you have 4 activities and Solar Club is one of them, we're going to put it on and we're going to make it sound as good as we possibly can. So think of it in comparison to what else you have done. Is it in the top 10? And by the way, for some people, 10 is a very overwhelming number. You don't have to fill the page. But if you're not filling the page, you should be checking more boxes, right? You should be able to do, I've done this in 9th, 10th, and 11th. And I do it consistently, and I do it more hours per week. And I hate to say, like, when I say colleges are doing the math, not neurotically, but they are looking at how you spend your time, right? So if you are in a situation where, you're doing, again, things for 1 or 2 hours a week, it's not going to be that impressive to colleges. They'd rather see you involved in 4 or 5 activities throughout high school, but you were really involved. And by the way, if you're older and you're like if you're a sophomore or a junior, and you're kind of thinking, what can I do now? You still have, if you're a sophomore, you have a little bit of this year, next year, junior year, and even part of senior year. And then if you're a junior, you still have a couple months, and next fall, think of, again, what positions can you hold? And even if you're just a member of a club, coordinate a bake sale, right? Organize something where you got the thing that you handled. That's what matters. So think of it that way. What's your role on this or in this? Any questions specifically about kind of activities and like the way it's out on applications? Paid work, I know we talked about kind of the summer job thing. Paid work is great. There is a drop down, which you can't see here because it's in their system, but it's basically what category does something fall in. And if it's paid work, it's its own thing. Some schools will even ask, what did you do with your earnings? And you could say, I'm saving them for college. I use it as my spending money. I donate it to animal shelters, whatever it is. Some schools care, some don't. But I always say having some paid work is great if your schedule allows. So excellent. Okay. Essays, letters of rec. This pie, this is what your essay should be talking about. It's the same pie as before. So when you're picking topics, you're picking the thing that's going to make you stand out. And you're not telling them about an event or an achievement. You're not like, I won first place in this. But let's say you're a writer. You may write an essay about, the first time you tried to sit down and write a novella and you accomplished it and you did it, but you learned something, right? Whatever it is, it makes sense if you're an English major or you're a writing major. It could also be, I don't know if you guys ever saw this. If you Google it, you can find it. There was I think it was 2-3 years ago, a girl got into, I think, 5 of the Ivies in Stanford with an essay that was about going to Costco with her grandmother. And it was about trying new things and exploring like how exciting Costco is with this world of adventures. In theory, that touches on none of these things in this pie, right? Where you think of it as going, well, that has nothing to do with anything, but it showed how she viewed the world. And if you notice when you read it, there's a little bit of each of these things, right? It's about wanting to try new things and recognizing, she even talks about stopping off somewhere that has like, some Armenian food, which she'd never tried. And all this, it shows, so I'll be honest, that's an essay that I love because it did so well. It's a very extended metaphor. And it's funny because a lot of the other schools that she didn't get into actually came out when it got so popular going, we don't recommend writing like this, because we didn't get a sense of who she was. So you run the risk, if you're a creative writer, of either really wowing somebody or maybe kind of not impressing them, because they're like, great, so it's a beautiful story, what does it tell me about you? So you can read a ton of great essays, and I have a million that I can always share that are different styles. It also depends on your writing style. Somebody who's a great creative writer, we want to include that and incorporate that. But think about, what you learned. Any personal statement should be, who are you and why are you going to be how are you going to benefit the college? How are you going to benefit their community? What are you going to be like? So I think that the best story I can always tell, I had a student, and it was an essay. We clashed so hard over this topic because he so desperately wanted to write about going, so this will date me, but this was like going to New Orleans after Katrina, right? So this was ages ago, but it always stuck with me because he wanted to write about going and experiencing like extreme poverty. And he went on a community service trip, right, to try to help rebuild. And he started out talking about wanting to write about how lucky he is. And I was like, nope, that's a hard pass, because every college is going to go, you should have known you were lucky. It's not that your privilege was suddenly revealed to you when you saw people with their houses destroyed living in poverty before that even. Like, that's not the thing. So we kept going back and forth. What would be a good topic? How do you do this? And what I kept saying is, give me something specific. Give me a moment that impacted you. So by the way, so Patty, you asked if the graphics right. It's showing the notable accomplishments, leadership, volunteer work, community impact, correct? So the idea is that, just to be clear on this, this should be showing you what you should be picking one of these things as a topic and trying it together. I'll make that more clear, but as long as that's what you guys are seeing, we'll go over this. This is going back to your activities and how it relates to your essays. But I'll try to touch on that more. But so anyway, so this kid, we went back and forth. He finally came up with an event that while he was there, he had a woman, so he was white. He went there, the community they were serving was Black. And he had his first encounter with like reverse racism, that a lot of the Black residents had no interest in having these West Side white boys coming in West Side LA, flying in as their saviors, right? So there was a lot of angst, a lot of tension around it. When you have that, I think he was trying to articulate kind of how that impacted him. And he finally came up with the story of one woman who would yell just racial slurs at all the white boys. And that was constant. And then on the last day, they had extra energy efficient light bulbs. And they all thought she wasn't home. So he was like, I'm gonna go leave them on her doorstep. It's our last day. Now she at least has some new light bulbs. And she was home. And she opened the door to start to yell at him, and then saw what he was doing and burst into tears. And the essay became about how everyone has pride and no one wants to need help. So it started out with him being the white knight and talking about how he went to go save people and how he's so great and how he's so lucky. And it turned into this lesson of humility, of recognizing, what the human experience is. So the reason I give that as an example I know this graphic looks like it's not right. The idea is, if you think of that topic, it does tie into all of these things, right? It's how he gave back to the community. He did volunteer work. There was leadership in there, but it's humanized. So what's on your activities spreadsheet, or the actual application for activities, it's just a description, right? Here you're using those exact same things to figure out, how can I show them I'm a good person, I'm a kind person. I'm gonna take advantage of any opportunity to make the world a better place or challenge myself. Here's what I've overcome. And another girl this year who wrote about, she was interested in robotics stuff. And she and her robotics team, she convinced them to take on some like pro bono projects, that they built wheelchairs for dogs at the shelter. And that was another essay that girl cleaned up. She got into so many places I never would have expected. But again, if you look at this pie chart, the desire to build wheelchairs for puppies at shelters, it's all these, right? It's touching on all of this, but it humanizes it. It makes her more interesting and unique and different than everybody else. Does that make sense? So when we're talking about essays, You want to make sure that you're finding something that highlights you in a way and is highlighting all your strengths and accomplishments, but also is giving a sense of who you are. And are you funny? Are you compassionate? What are your traits that you want to show them? The letters of rec will do the same thing. So when you're having your teachers write this, usually colleges want a junior year teacher. Some want a second junior year teacher. Others will take somebody from another grade, almost never freshman year unless you had them 2 years. So always know you're going to be asking a junior year teacher regardless, maybe somebody who had you sophomore year and then again senior year. But those two teachers should be giving you, I'm trying to think how to phrase it. They should be, again, rounding you out in a way that's showing your humanity. Don't just pick somebody who is going to say she's an A student and she's great at biology, right? Or great at history. It should be, she is engaging in class. She's dynamic. She asks really in-depth questions. She helps her classmates. She asks for additional reading to better understand the thing. She, I proposed some sort of competition and she immediately jumped up and coordinated a team to enter that contest, right? Things like that. That's what should be in your letters of rec. So make sure that you have relationships with certain teachers who are going to do this because, again, back to this lovely graphic, the letters of rec needs to reinforce this. Because this is another thing. If you are telling people that you did something amazing, go back to the girl with the urinals. If she's going to write an essay about that, there's always a little bit of a question on admissions rep going, how true is this? But if a teacher from her high school mentions, holy cow, this girl did this, which her environmental science teacher did, wrote this incredible letter of rec about how she took initiative and how she's such a self-starter and so motivated, and touched on the leadership, the volunteer work, the community impact, the accomplishments. The letters of rec you should have from a teacher, we'll talk about coaches and stuff in a second, who know these aspects of you, not just that you're a good student. Okay. Another way to look at it is if you're a part of like the Model UN, thing, if you do that, or Junior Statesman of America or anything like that, if you have somebody who coaches your team, but also taught you in US history, that's a great letter of rec because they can speak to you in different situations. If you babysit one of your teacher's kids, then that's a great recommendation because they know you in different areas and it's going to be more unique than just the normal, this kid's good at this subject. Okay. So Common App essay prompts. This is small, so you may have to squint on this one, but these are the prompts that come up. I think this year they're going to ask something that's kind of like more about how you spent your time in COVID in some capacity. But these are the things, they're very vague. The most important prompt is the one at the end, which is an essay on the topic of your choice. So the reality is the other ones are just a jumping off point. So think of your background, identity, interests, lessons you've taken from obstacles, times you've been challenged or questioning something. All of these things, they're meant to just prompt ideas to get the juices flowing. If one of them really triggers something for you, great. One thing I always want to emphasize, it's very easy to talk about something bad that happened to you. That is fine as long as there's a reason colleges should accept you because of it. So whether it's overcoming a learning difference, whether it's a death in the family, anything that is something very severe. I mean, I've had kids talk about like their own mental health challenges. That is completely fair game to an extent, but make sure the end of the essay is about, like, I had a great girl this year who had really struggled with eating disorders and body image, and like sophomore year, got some help, came back junior year, started a club, but the club became so successful at her school that it was very specific about body image at all girls schools. And so now pretty much every all girls school in LA has a chapter of this organization, and it's all about body image. So her talking about, her body image issues and eating disorders, there's a reason, right? But if you're just going to say, I had these things and then I overcame it and now I'm good, or I'm on the mend, that's not a reason colleges would accept you, right? And unfortunately, again, if you've had a death in the family, it's very easy for it to almost turn into, I had this hardship and I still got good grades, or this is why my grades weren't strong. That's not for the Common App prompt. Now, if it's about how you learned, like, even if it's something generic, I've had, unfortunately, so many students where someone very close to them had cancer. So why does that make you a good applicant? And it's such a horrible question to have to ask when it's such a profound impact on these kids. But you have to think of that. So when you're answering a prompt, keep in mind, at the end of the day, when they've read it, they need to look at it and be like, oh, because she went through X, Y, and Z, she is now a better person and a better candidate than someone who did not go through that. That's the way to kind of look at these prompts. Does that make sense? And we'll come back to the letters of rec I see your question, Susie, about like members of the community, like a coach. This will come back to when we talk about like athletic recruitment or arts and things like that, which we'll do in a quick second. Okay, so UCs, don't worry about. Letters of recommendation, just to kind of give you a sense, this is what the kind of chart that anybody who writes a letter of rec is looking at. So you can see that they are rating the students. They have to write the letter, but they're also filling this out. So they're rating you from below average all the way to one of the top few I've ever encountered, top 1% of all my students, in academic achievement, intellectual promise, quality of writing, original thought, productive class discussion, all of these factors, right? So think of it when you're picking somebody, you want somebody who's going to put you on the far right into that at least excellent, outstanding, one of the top few. You want to be in there. Obviously, if somebody's going to say you're average, that's probably not a great letter of rec to be requesting. Okay. Now, well, let's actually jump on and talk about kind of some of the stuff about sports and letters of rec from outside. We'll jump there. So for those of you who are student athletes, because I want to talk about athletic recruitment in general, but if you, let's just say you're a casual swimmer, you swim for fun, but you're not going to be, a recruit for college. Absolutely, you can get a letter of rec from your swim coach if the college allows it. There are a lot of colleges that don't accept anything other than academic letters of recommendation. There are other schools that will accept anything you want to send. There's usually a requirement that you send at least the one junior year academic, but sometimes the second letter of rec can be from anybody. It could be an art teacher, it could be a family you babysit for. Even like Dartmouth has a thing where if you're applying to Dartmouth, they want a letter from your best friend. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. And it just depends on, again, where you're applying and what they allow. But absolutely, if somebody can speak to your character, your determination, all of these great qualities, great. Now, if you're an athletic recruit, you definitely need it. And usually there'll be a place for that through the recruitment process, again, depending on where you're applying and how much clout the athletic department has compared to admissions. But generally that's, just depends. But yes, if you can, I always say line those types of people up. And the likelihood is that at least a school or two are going to be allowing you to send that. Now, if you are an athlete, the one thing that this also speeds up is your testing timeline. So if you're going to do SAT or ACT, this is something you want the scores sooner because you are a much stronger candidate as a recruit if you have scores to prove that you are competitive academically at the school. So we'll talk about the best of the best. Let's just say you're applying to Stanford for, volleyball, swimming, pick a thing. If you're any of those and you're applying to one of the top programs in the country, of course they know you're good. If they're not gonna be looking at you as an athlete if you're not good, but you have to get through admissions first, right? And there's always an agreement. If you're amazing, they'll usually help pull you through. But at high academic schools, you'd be amazed at how many excellent athletes don't make the cut because the university looks at it going, they're gonna flunk out. They're never gonna survive here. So if you can go in as early as possible when you start talking to coaches, like, by the way, I have a 27, I have a 32, whatever it is, and always be like, it's my first test. I'm sure it'll go up from here. This is my blind score. That's great. But you want to have that score because it differentiates you as a recruit and puts you in a category where they're less concerned already. They already know kind of your GPA so far. They know you have good test scores. And they're not wondering if you're going to be somebody who ends up sending them, a 17 on the ACT, which is below national average. Then they're like, there's no way admissions would get behind this request, right? So if you can get your test score sooner, it helps. D1, D2, D3, there's so many questions. We actually have someone on staff who does athletic recruitment counseling. And especially with COVID, the rules have changed so much. And hopefully we'll go back to something normal after this year. But knowing the dead period, knowing when you can reach out to coaches, when they can actually answer your call, when they can actually call you back, all of these rules and regulations differ by not necessarily conference, but division. Even some conferences have slightly different rules. But knowing these aspects and knowing when to be proactive, because if you're in the top 10 in a sport in the country, the coaches are going to find you, right? Even if you're top 100 probably. But if you're not that competitive, but you're still really good, you may need to be proactive in reaching out to different colleges and different coaches and starting to establish that. So I think, if you're an athlete, don't wait too long to start trying to reach out or figuring out what might be a good fit for you. And if you're if you are a position specific, like if you're a pitcher in baseball, right? Or you're a goalie in soccer, part of the recruitment process is looking at people's rosters or colleges' rosters and understanding going, okay, well, this team is going to have a goalie graduating right before I get there. That's what you want. If you're going to look and go, oh, they have 3 goalies who are sophomores, they're not going to be looking for another goalie. So this helps you when you're starting out sometimes, if you're position specific, to recognize kind of what that path is going to be. If you're a great athlete, this obviously makes a huge difference. And I have sent so many kids who are very good athletes and very good students, but not exceptional at either, to Harvard, to Yale, to places like that, because to be really good at both, you can be an AB student with a couple APs, but if you're really good at volleyball, they recognize that if you were exceptional at volleyball, you wouldn't be playing at Dartmouth, right? You'd be playing at Stanford or UCLA or somewhere like that. They recognize this. So the amount that it makes an enormous difference when you're looking at high academic schools if you are a competitive athlete. So if that's on your radar, recognize, look, you don't want to count on it, and you, knock on wood, you can blow your knee, right? You can do a lot of things that can take this out of play, but it is something that can factor in and make a huge, huge difference. Art, dance, music, all of these things, the same thing. There's supplements. Some schools, if you're applying as an art major or dance major or theater major, you have to audition, you have to send a portfolio. Other colleges make it optional. Liberal arts colleges sometimes don't require it. They're like, we'll chat with you if you get in and then you can decide to be an art major. But if you are solid at anything where an audition or a portfolio would help, start thinking of that now, because you want to start building that art portfolio if that's a strength. Some schools, it's just going to round you out and be like, look at this interesting skill set I have. Other schools, if you're applying as an art major, that's something that you can do. Now, back to an original question about declaring majors, which we talked briefly about. Depending on the major you're picking in the school you're applying to, I want you to think of this as, is it going to help you? Because I have a student right now who the amount of social justice and political, she has interned for mayor of LA. She's done it for the city councilman. She was helping in Georgia with she's from Los Angeles, helping in Georgia with, everything going on with the election. She was so involved that her applying as a political science major, which is what she wants to do, she's going to be one of the best candidates. So then if you put your major on the application, you are compared within the pool of other people who put the same major. But if you are saying, I want to be pre-med, and really all you did was like theater during high school, and you didn't really take that many APs, and you didn't volunteer at a hospital, don't put pre-med. It's not going to help you. You could then go undecided or undeclared. But the downside and the concern with any of those options, undecided or undeclared, is that you're being compared to everyone. All right. So anyone who doesn't know what they want to do is now your competition. So it's up to you to decide if you are good enough at something specific to really stand out. Like I have another girl I worked with this year. She's from LA, got flown out to New York City to do genetic research at some incredible lab. I don't even know how this worked, but they paid for her housing during COVID to be in the lab and do all this stuff. That girl put biomedical engineering on her app, and guess what? She got into Johns Hopkins, right? It's because who's going to have done more than that, especially during COVID? But that's where it's up to you to determine your strengths. If somebody looks at your activities, looks at your transcript, are you going to be the best at something? Then you want to put your area of intended academic interest or majors. Be careful. There are very few schools that lock you into your major, because most schools, it's the end of sophomore year that you declare your major. But do be careful. Again, obviously very familiar with the California schools being out here. In California, there are a couple state schools in the whole system that lock you in for 1 year, whatever you put on your application. Then I was like, you've got to be sure that you're actually putting something real. You can't game the system on that. So just, be careful. But again, that's very, very rare. Now, looking at some questions here. So one of them is, I've heard that if you excel at something, say writing or English, you should get a different type of teacher, like a math teacher, to write you a letter to show you're diverse. Do you agree? I've also heard humor is something to avoid in essays. Do you agree? So let's talk about the letters of rec first. Yes and no. I generally say if you are applying, let's say you get your 2 letters of rec for junior year. If you're applying as an English major, you want an English teacher to talk about how great you are at it. But I think it's also really solid to have a math or science teacher be that second letter of rec. What you wouldn't want to do is apply pre-med and only have an English teacher write a letter of rec, because you want somebody who can also speak to your competency within the field and your passion for it or anything like that. So generally, if you're having 2 academic letters, you want them to be from varying fields. You would never want to have 2 math teachers or 2 history teachers in any capacity, but I think balancing that out. Humor is something to avoid in essays. It depends. My answers are terrible because they're so vague, but yes, generally.
But if you're a good writer who can be funny, go for it. Some of the best essays I've ever read. I had a girl who wrote an essay about it was about being fluent in sarcasm, which we like, again, kind of argued about the topic at the beginning. I was like, that sounds terrible. I was like, what are you gonna say? And her essay was basically founded in the fact that she's a mathlete, and so like math nerd, but also a cheerleader, and how she had to learn almost to defend herself in both settings because she gets made fun of in both, and that being fluent in sarcasm. But it was so funny, but she was such a genius writer. And again, she got in so many places, right? So recognize that if you're a great writer who can write humor well, it's absolutely a plus in your personal statement. Now, not when you're saying like, why do you want to go to University of Michigan? Don't use humor there necessarily. But in your personal statement, your personality should shine through. And again, I've had some kids that are just, they try to be funny and it just doesn't work, then don't. But if you can actually do it well, I think it's a gift. Because also think from the reader's perspective, they're so tired of reading the same type of essay over and over again. If you can stand out, but again, you want to stand out in a good way. So that's something to keep in mind. So do you have clients who go to Canadian colleges? Yes. We have actually not a ton, but absolutely. You mentioned British Columbia, McGill, University of Toronto. We definitely have a lot who do it. Usually they're dual citizens, or they're some part of the Commonwealth because they get such a big break when it comes to tuition. So we absolutely have people who apply there, and we can talk about strengths, weaknesses, anything with those schools for sure. We actually have several counselors on staff who specialize in both Canadian and UK schools as well. Now, Anne asked, in California, don't you apply to specific colleges within a university? If you're talking about the UC system, absolutely. And Cal State's, and those are the ones where I'm saying you can get locked in, but this can also be private schools. So this is where we talk about know how a university or a college is structured. So if you apply to UCLA and you want to be, let's say you want to we'll keep going with pre-med. You want to be pre-med and be the College of Arts and Science, but you're a great dancer. You're like, I'm going to apply through the dance school, right? Which is a totally separate college within UCLA. You could do that, but you have to understand that you have to now transfer to the College of Arts and Science, which generally is easier. And this is something to keep in mind. It's way easier to go from dance to College of Arts and Science, which houses like 90% of the majors, right? Except the very specific ones. But if you apply to the College of Arts and Science and decide you want to do the School of Architecture, that's really hard, if not impossible, to make the transfer. It just depends. Not impossible, but it's hard. So, switching, and now just make sure that you're applying to the school that is the best fit for you, that houses the majors you would actually want to pursue. Okay, another question. Can you say a little about how to approach college apps if you have a screenager who has very few activities and is not shooting for elite colleges? Absolutely. This is about showing what they are actually excited about and interested in. And if nothing's really, and I have students who've done very little, especially COVID on a bright side. The one nice thing I always tell my students who are not super involved, I'm like, you have an excuse. It's like, maybe you were going to cure cancer last summer and you just couldn't because of COVID. Like, it's fine, but you want to have a situation where they at least get a sense of who the kid is. So if you have the time to start, think of the narrative you're selling, which it is marketing, right? At the end of the day, when they look at an application and they read the letters of rec, they read the personal statement, they look at the transcript, and then look at the activities, how do these fit together? And maybe it's as simple as like, there's babysitting, there's tutoring. Okay, get a sense of that personality already. If you have a paid job, looking to, can you take, again, one community college class over the summer to show I'm interested in business or I'm interested in philosophy or whatever it is. I think you don't have to have a ton, but you want to make an identity for yourself that is clear. Now, the bigger the school, the less they care about that to an extent. If you're applying to a big state school, you're more likely to have a big state school go, you have the GPA, you have the test scores, we're good, right? But the really competitive state schools are going to care more about that personality. And the smaller the school, the more they want to know, how are you going to fit into our community? One thing we haven't talked about, which I'll touch on very briefly, is early decision, early action, regular decision. So these are terms some of you might be familiar with, some may not be. So let's just go through these. So early decision is binding. It's legally binding. You apply usually November 1st. You usually hear in December. If they accepted you, you have to go. You signed a contract, your parents signed a contract, your high school signed a contract. This increases your chances at a lot of schools. So the best schools for ED are schools that are a little out of your range, but not too much. So if you have a 3.5, applying early decision to Harvard isn't going to make a difference, right? You're not suddenly competitive now
going there with the GPA that's probably their average is a 4.5. However, if you have a school where the average is maybe, a 3.7 and you have a 3.5, and you're like, I'd really love to go there. Early decision, some schools you'll see they accept 2 or 3 times the percentage from early decision pool because it helps their yield. They can now go to US News and World Report or wherever it is, say 100% of those kids that we accepted came. They all loved us enough. They didn't take another school. So it helps them when that happens. Early action is a similar deadline, or usually the same deadline, but not all colleges offer both. Some do offer early action and early decision. But early action means, again, maybe November 1st deadline, they get back to you in December, you still have till May 1st to make a decision. So early action just means you acted early, they acted early, now you can sit on it and you're going to college before the holidays. That's basically the benefit. It doesn't necessarily help you statistically at most schools. Some schools, there's a little bit of an advantage to early action, but regular decision, this is the big downside. And here's the thing, when it comes to financial aid and scholarships, we'll talk briefly about, and hopefully you guys don't mind going a little over because there's so much to cover when we're talking about this stuff, but I'll talk fast. Early decision, the downside is the financial side because you're committing to going, which means, you're accepting whatever financial aid package they do or do not give you. Now, the reality is if your finances have changed and somebody got laid off or something really bad happened, of course, they're going to work with you and let you break that contract. But don't go into it going, well, if it's not good enough, we'll break it. Because every once in a while, I've seen schools who are jerks who won't let parents out of it or will threaten legal action. I had one school that called a kid's other school that they were going to go to instead of the ED and tried to get him basically kicked out before he even started because they were so mad that they broke their ED agreement. So you don't want to break ED agreements if you can avoid it. But from a financial standpoint, there is always that kind of backdoor exit if you need to. Here's the thing, ED is better strategically, but again, it can be a challenge when it comes to, again, the finances. Here's the way to look at this. Regular decision. So generally a January 1st deadline, you find out, in March, you have till May 1st to decide. The problem is that pool for regular decision for schools that do offer early decision or early action is them rounding out their class. So think of it this way. Let's just say in early decision, they took a ton of social justice activists, right? And all these kids who were super woke and doing all these great things and saving the communities, they're going to have a limit. Now they're like, we need more Spanish majors. We need more philosophy majors. We need more engineers. So in regular decision, they take what they didn't get early decision. Does that make sense? So the challenge with regular is it's a crapshoot because you're hoping they didn't take too many kids with your qualifications or your storyline, your pros. You want to be different, and then it's kind of luck of the draw. ED, if you're qualified and they love you, they're probably going to take you. Again, when you're applying to Harvard, it's you're still looking at 5%, but you have a better shot. Regular, you're just praying they didn't take, another social justice person before you. So that's something to just keep in mind. Now, quick thing about scholarships and financial aid, then we'll open up some more questions. So there are school-specific scholarships. So there's merit scholarships, there's financial aid. Financial aid there's a calculator. And if you get on any college's website, go to the Office of Financial Aid under the menu, there's going to be a calculator asking you the questions. What you have to know is it's not the same everywhere. So there's something called the EFC. It's the Estimated Family Contribution. It's based on this calculator, what they think you can afford. All right. And you can sometimes kind of argue this, but not really, because they basically just calculated it. And it's a number going, you make this much. But be aware that some schools will take into account your retirement funds. They'll take into account equity in your house. They'll take into account going, you have the money, it's just not liquid. Other schools will only look at your W-2s. It just depends. So when you're looking at how schools calculate aid, you always want to ask kind of what they're looking at, or at least play with the calculator to get a sense of it, because it can be very different. This is why you hear about some kids getting so much more money at one school than the other in a financial aid aspect, which is just numbers driven. It has nothing to do with merit. It's just a calculation. Scholarships are very different. So there's merit scholarships throughout, or from not high schools, colleges, and then there's like private ones. So for instance, if you're applying to Emory in Atlanta, Emory has a few merit scholarships for kids who are just overachievers and they want to lure and wine and dine those kids. If you apply to University of Oregon, Oregon gives a ton of merit scholarships because Oregon's a great school, but they also know they lose a lot of kids to slightly higher ranked schools. So they're going to wine and dine those kids. They'll be like, I'll give you $20,000 a year to come. So if you are an above average applicant at that type of school, you're going to get merit money. because they're trying to convince you to go when they know you could potentially do quote unquote better, right? At least in the rankings and things like that. So the merit money from colleges comes now. A lot of top schools, like we're talking top 20, a lot of them don't even have merit scholarships, because the way they look at it is like, your merit is getting in. We don't need to woo you. Like you're coming if we accept you. And if you're not, oh, well, we've got somebody else who will take your place. But they also will give a lot of aid. So there's a lot of grants and stuff that's not merit-based, it's financial, where if they're like, the government will only cover X amount, we'll make this, almost a full ride for you. So don't discount private schools because their sticker price is so high. They usually have a much better endowment, which means they can give you a lot more money. Okay. Third type is the private stuff. So when you have private scholarships are like, Google has some, Coca-Cola has like full rides they give out, right? But there's also tiny small ones that this is where I ask your high school counselors for sure. But if you're a great writer, you're a great math student, there's usually like competitions you can enter, or you can write an essay about this, or again, social justice. There's a Dr. Seuss one, I think it's for $10,000, where it's like a funny, witty prompt about Dr. Seuss stuff, and whoever wins gets 10 grand. The ones that are smaller are easier to win. So I always point this out because everyone wants the full ride. Everyone wants the ones that are 250 grand or 100 grand or 50 grand or even 10 grand. But if you apply to the ones that are $500, $1,000, you apply to a lot of those, and you can find this on Google. Again, sometimes it's your local Rotary Club, right? It's things like that. Apply to those because you're gonna have fewer applicants. The number of things I've seen in the newspaper that are saying the Rotary Club in this city, nobody applied for their scholarship. Nobody even knew it existed. So the money's just sitting there. No one took it. And so being proactive and really reaching out, if, whatever company, if you're at even a medium-sized company, for the parents, ask if they have a scholarship. A lot of times they do, and they just don't advertise it. And it could be, again, a couple grand, but those add up really fast. So this is Google out the wazoo. Find the ones that really benefit you, play to your strengths, kind of play to your interests and everything. Okay, so I've heard admissions decisions are biased based on whether a student will apply for financial aid. Are cash students more attractive than students who need financial aid? As always, it depends on the school. So a lot of schools have gone what's called need blind, which means that there's a box on the application on the Common App that says, will you be applying for financial aid? On their side, if they claim to be need blind, they can't see your answer. So they don't know if you see need blind on any college, that's good. That means they won't know if you're applying for aid. By the way, that's usually more private schools because they have the endowment. Public schools sometimes like, we couldn't take everybody if everyone, that's not going to work for them. But some state schools are. And it's changing every year. And frankly, COVID's impacting things because some schools that had great endowments don't right now because the last year was horrible, and vice versa. And some, state-run schools, they are not getting the funding from the state, so they're cutting aid, right? So just be aware. But if they say need blind, you're fine. If they don't say need blind, look, to an extent, yes, the cash aspect is going to be better. To an extent, it makes sense. It's horrible, but it makes sense from their perspective because most schools are need blind. So if they say they don't care, you can trust that. If they don't say that, know that generally saying no financial aid might be a slight benefit, but it shouldn't honestly be too much because most of these schools, when you realize they have billions of dollars in endowment, helping somebody with 10 grand a year, if they love the candidate's not usually a make or break. Question on thoughts on gap year and deferring. Good question, especially with everything going on in the world right now. So here's the main thing. I would say make a decision before you even apply to colleges. Don't take a year off and then apply, because I've seen kids try to do that. You want to have a game plan. So a lot of schools, you can, sometimes even on the application, they'll ask, are you hoping to take a gap year? And then you'll be like, here's my plan for my gap year. You apply, they accept you. They're like, great, we'll see you in a year, right? Go enjoy your gap year. The same just normal deferring. But some schools need to be convinced, why should we let you defer? Why should we let you take a gap year? So you need to have something going, I'm going to go do this research. I'm going to go, if it's just to travel the world, that's lovely. But why are you a better candidate in a year than you are right now? And if it's just worldliness, don't mistake worldliness for privilege and privilege for worldliness. It depends on what you're doing, right? So sometimes the ability to do something awesome isn't actually awesome in and of itself. It's that you just had this opportunity because somebody could pay for it. That's great, but colleges may not be that impressed if you're just traveling, right? But if you're doing community service while you travel or working with orphanages around the world, that's different too. So if you're gonna do a gap year or defer, have a game plan going into it. And look, you can always adjust it But I do think it's harder because I've had students who are like, well, I'm just going to apply in a year. Then if you didn't have a plan and you waited a year, college was like, well, what were you doing? And if the answer was maturing and working a part-time job, that's not appealing to most colleges. You had to have been doing something more productive. So I'm a big fan of taking a gap year or deferring for the right people and the right reasons, but you want to make sure you have something that colleges will view as a benefit to them for you having taken that time off. Does that make sense too? Okay, then, so this is something just last minute here for the miscellaneous factors we kind of talked about. We talked a little bit about portfolio and auditions. We talked a little bit about athletic recruitment. Demonstrated interest. This comes down to campus tours. And are you following them? Colleges care about, they want to be wanted as well, right? Like all humans, they want to know you're excited about them. The things that you can be doing right now, whether you're an 8th grade or whether you're a junior, doesn't matter. Start following them on social media. Use your email address, not your parents, not, if you have, by the way, if you have an email address that's like gangsterforlife@gmail.com, like don't use that one. Make a like first name dot last name sort of, email address, but sign up, get emails from the schools that you're excited about, get on their list. Because if that's the email address that you use when you apply, they can look back at the records and be like, she's been reading our emails for years. She's really excited about us, right? Also, they do track if you open those emails and if you click on the links. It's very big brother. But recognize that just signing up isn't enough. If they can see that you wanted, their emails but never bothered to open one and you're claiming that it's your dream school, they're going to call BS, right? And say like, clearly you're not that excited about us if you don't even read what we send you. I always recommend saving emails that have anything relevant that might be something you use in an essay. So if you're applying to school X and you get an email from them about how they're investing in a new, pick a business program or new lab for their engineering students, save it. Or they're highlighting a professor who sounds interesting and relative, because then you can, if it's something that's relevant to what you're doing, and you can say this professor's research inspires me, and mention that in your why this school essay, it's great. So save those emails, follow them on social media. When you visit college campuses, it just depends. Right now with COVID, it's a mess, such a dumpster fire, because you can't really go take great tours anywhere other than the South. So I did have a student who decided to go. They went to Pennsylvania like 2 weeks ago. Everywhere was like self-guided tours, which is basically walk around, don't go in any buildings, and here's a map, and that's it. That still gives you a sense of campus. It gives you a sense of like architecture, I guess. Tells you how many coffee shops and restaurants and things like that are around. But that's it. Like you're not getting a sense of what types of students are there because it's COVID. Those kids are off campus. They're not on campus. But when you went to the South, my kids who went to look at Tulane, Miami, Clemson, all open, full, it's like COVID doesn't exist. So you go there and it's like you can walk around campus, you can go inside dorms, you can go look at things, you can sit in on classes. And so you have this opportunity, if you're comfortable with it, to go look at schools that are open. But by fall, that should be better. Summer, I'm always hesitant to say go look because, again, it's an empty campus. You're not getting much of a sense. It's better than nothing if that's your only chance to go. But I would say if you can go when students are actually in session, it's going to be much more informational because you can look and go, are these my people? Are these people that do I see myself fitting in here? Do I see people hang out in the quads in the libraries or at the coffee shops? And yeah, are they my people basically? And you can stop students and ask questions when they're there. Otherwise, you're just getting what's on the, on the websites. Colleges right now are doing virtual tours and virtual info sessions. Again, if you're in high school at any age, sign up for them. Again, use the email address that you're going to use when you apply, but sign up, start doing the tours, listen to things, learn what colleges say, is great about them or unique about them. Always say that your list that you're trying to create should be very specific to what you're interested in. It shouldn't just be like a prestige list, right? Here's the top 10 schools. Hopefully I get into one. You should know if you want to be in a small town or a big town. And when I say no, not necessarily now, but by the time you apply, but do you want a small town or a big town? Do you want, the big state school? Do you care about having football or Greek life? Do you want a school where it's very pre-professional and like setting you up for a career as an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman or woman? Or do you want a school where you discuss ideas and learn fun stuff and discover who you are? These are all things that by doing these tours and virtual everything, you're going to get some idea. When you start visiting, you're going to get a really good sense. So whenever you travel for, when travel is a thing again, and if you go to San Francisco, you go to New York, you go like any city, just visit. If you're near local universities, go visit them. Get a sense of what's too big, what's too small, what's vibrant, what's dull. And that starts to help you build the list as you get older. So I think college tours and campus tours are important from your information, but they're also important because when you can do the official tours and sign in, it's demonstrated interest, right? They know you showed up. They know you went and did these things, and that matters a lot. The last two little pieces of the pie there, social media and interviews. I point this out because social media, I'm sure all of you are smart about what you post on social media, but if not, think about this, because colleges, I think it's like 68% of colleges now actively use social media in their decision making. So they are trying to find you online to see what you're really like. And so clean it up, right? And if you have stuff, because I have a lot of students who are like, I'm just going to block my account. It's like, no, make it an online resume, right? I was like, where it's like you posing with your Habitat for Humanity hat and your little thing, or you and your parents out to a nice dinner. Like things that are going to make them go, oh, she's close to her family and look at her supporting the community and things. And you can be just you and your friends at a birthday party. Don't have a red Solo cup in your hand, right? Think about things that could look bad to an admissions officer and take it down. But I think blocking your social media usually claims you have something to hide. And you could be using this as an opportunity to show them good things that make them want you. So do that. And I would even say, try Googling your name, see what comes up and see what's easy to find. Right? Is it your Instagram? Is it Facebook? And then when you start doing like the Snapchat stuff, it's obviously different because of what they can actually see. But anyway, so like Twitter, Instagram are usually the big ones. Interviews. This is just, the reason it's only 10% is that it's usually they consider it informational only. Some schools will tell you that they're going to use it really in decision making. It usually, like, if you have a horrible interview, you're out of luck. It's not going to go well for you. If you have an amazing interview, it may tip the scale. But the number of people I know, because interviews are usually conducted by local alumni. So when you have local alumni meeting you at a coffee shop or even doing a Zoom session, it's not somebody who works for the university. So they're just taking notes of what they think of you. And the university is always like, thanks for the feedback. And they're really looking at it more to weed people out. So do the interview. This is the other thing. If there is an optional interview, do it, because schools sometimes will hold it against kids who don't sign up for an interview because it shows lack of interest, right? If you're saying it's my dream school and I'm too lazy to go sign up for that interview, they take it as I don't really care. So if they offer an interview, make sure you do it. All right. Okay. I think we covered, in me talking fast and hopefully not missing too many major things, most things. So this is, if you have any questions, one thing to keep in mind, I do free 30-minute consultations. It's not a sales pitch. It's nothing. It's very specific to you. So if you want to chat about your students and a path and, just even ask some very specific questions or very random questions, I'm happy to. If you go on our website, you'll get a pop-up, or you can reach out to the office and schedule something. But I'm happy to do just 30 minutes to actually, because there's always stuff that's more sensitive that you don't want to do on a big group chat or anything like that. But yeah, if you ever have any questions or want to meet with somebody, whether it's test prep, college counseling, athletic recruitment, we do it all, but I'm always happy to answer questions. So any other questions before we sign off today? I know we went over, so thanks everybody for your patience on this. Anything else? All good? All right, you guys, well, I'll let you get on with your evening. Thank you so much for doing this on your Fridays. And let me know if you have any questions or concerns. And hopefully I didn't stress everyone out too much, but it's 5 o'clock somewhere. So take care of that.
Thanks so much.
All right, you guys, have a good one. It's lovely seeing everybody.